Hey up! I made a video a few months ago about why people should try motorcycle commuting. A lot of people just use bikes for fun, and they don't realise the sort of practical benefits of commuting to work and back. Now, that video was quite well received. Obviously, to a lot of people, commuting is just common sense on a motorcycle. Some people, though, seem to think it was a bad idea. I'm not sure why. Then over the weekend, I came across an article in Sunderland magazine, which, as the name might suggest, is a magazine based in Sunderland, and it sort of presents news and articles of interest sort of peculiar to the Sunderland area. It's not a magazine that I read. It popped up in my feed because obviously motorcycles and motorcycle commuting, etc., is in my range of interests. So Google obviously thought it would present it to me, which I'm glad it did. Now, I'll leave a link to this article in the video description down below. I should point out that it's not credited to anybody. It's just from Sunderland magazine. The name of the journalist or whoever wrote it isn't given. And I suspect, when I've done a little bit research on it, that this magazine does publish viewers' articles, so that might be what it is. But some of the facts and figures mentioned in this article, and I have to say it is a little bit light on facts and figures, do sort of tie up with my investigations that I do regularly during the course of each year on what motorcycle sales are doing. So it does, on the face of it, seem well researched. Now, this article suggests that in the latter half of 2025, small motorcycles generally considered to be commuter bikes, small capacity motorcycles and scooters, have seen a big rise in sales, especially scooters. Now, motorcycles started off as rich man's toys. It wasn't until the 1950s, really, that they cemented themselves as the ideal commuting machine for getting the average working man to work and back again. Now, to a greater extent, that fizzled out in the 1970s, and I would say they went back to the sort of previous occupation as just being toys for people that could afford them. But since the pandemic, we've seen a sea change in what manufacturers are offering us. I mean, it sort of started off with Royal Enfield and their J-Series 350s at the end of 2021. 350s, of course, being a class of motorcycle that has been ignored since the 1960s. A class of motorcycle which has pretty much been non-existent on UK roads, certainly since the early 1970s. And then, of course, this year we've seen Honda, enter the UK market with the GB 350S, and even BSA's got in on the game with the new Bantam. And then we have scooter companies like Royal Alloy entering the market with a 309cc modern classic scooter based on Lambrettas of the 1960s and 70s. Now, it's not just the modern classic segment that's seeing a boost in sales. It's all sort of commuter class motorcycles, below 500cc's. Because although all the people that are suddenly buying these machines have the same basic needs, they don't necessarily want a modern classic. Now, this article suggests, and I agree with it, that the uptick in sales apparently down initially to the cost of living crisis. Everything is getting more expensive. My shopping bill must be 40% more than it was 3 years ago. The biggest rise I've seen in 2 decades. In fact, if I'm honest, I can't remember a time in my lifetime over the last few decades where I've seen such a big rise in the cost of living. The cost of heating your house has gone up, interest rates have gone up, so mortgages are more expensive. It feels like we're all being taxed out of existence, with more tax rises supposedly to come. So it stands to reason that some households are having to look at the sustainability of continuing to run a motor car, whether it be new or second hand. Insurance has gone through the roof, petrol's more expensive, but of course for a lot of commuters it's the price of parking a car when you're at work that really tips the balance. With local councils removing a lot of car park facilities and council charging as well as private car parking charges, again, all rising by a similar amount. You know, everybody's affected by the cost of living, so everybody ends up having to put the prices up. The problem is wages are not going up by the same amount, so all households are getting squeezed. And I think the most noticeable thing about this trend is it's scooters that are really taking off. Scooters were originally designed for people as two-wheel transport, for those that didn't normally ride a motorcycle. It was a replacement for a car. It provides some of the convenience and weather protection that a car provides. So scooters are more attractive to people who are not, if you like, motorcyclists. They've got no real motorcycling history. They just need something cheaper to get them to work. So a scooter is, you know, the obvious choice for these people. And of course the other thing that this whole commuter range of motorcycling has is a low initial cost. Usually under £5,000, often well under £5,000, even below 4. So when you take into consideration that the cost of parking a motorcar for 8.5 hours a day at work can be in excess of £50 a week, it's a no-brainer that getting a scooter or a small motorcycle on finance, you're probably going to save over £100 a month. Now, this article hinted that people are giving up cars in favour of motorcycles. I don't think that's strictly speaking true. I think what they're doing is they're giving up using the cars for commuting and buying a motorcycle because it makes financial sense. You know, taxing one of these vehicles is much cheaper than taxing a car. Fuel consumption is negligible. Your journey to and from work is probably going to be a lot quicker than in a car. And although in winter, you know, motorcycling to work does have its drawbacks, the major winner for a lot of these people, I think, is car parking fees. I mean, you know, not everybody's got the ability to park at work free of charge. Park and ride prices everywhere have gone up again this year. And let's face it, as good as some of these park and ride services are, they add about 3/4 of an hour to an hour travelling time on your daily commute every day. So, that, you know, that's not for everybody. So I think where small motorcycles for commuting really score brownie points for a lot of these people that have decided to take them on is that they can, generally speaking, park them safely and free of charge at the place of work. Now, I've been making videos for about 4 years now stating that the 350 class is going to be much more popular in the future, and it is potentially going to take over to some extent from the car for the daily commute. Even though we didn't realise at the time, or I didn't realise at the time, that you know, our cost of living was going to squeeze us to the extent that it's squeezing us now. And let's face it, there's no light at the end of the tunnel. The current administration have taken a weak economy and killed it, and now they seem to be hell-bent on making it even worse with higher taxation. And we've got another 3.5 years with this government, so, you know, even if we had a snap election, I don't know, middle of next year, when we've got a competent government in, it's not something that you can just undo overnight. It's going to take years to reverse it, if it can be reversed. So I think this year, you know, the financial crisis that we're in has been the sort of tipping point, if you like, that's caused people to jump into buying a motorcycle or a scooter to get to work. Even though I think this would eventually have happened in some shape or form anyway. And I don't think I'm alone in thinking that. After all, you know, these manufacturers that have introduced these bikes to the UK market over the last few years, you know, they don't just wake up one morning and decide to send us a new 350 over or something like that. It takes years of market research before they decide it's worth doing it. And obviously, you know, these motorcycle manufacturers have been working on these projects for years before they've brought them into the UK. So they already knew something was happening, something was going to change in the future. Now, I think part of this, and a lot of people don't seem to take this into consideration, is the, you know, forced selling of electric cars from 2030, as it still stands at the moment. Some well-known manufacturers have already abandoned the internal combustion engine and gone fully electric. A lot of people don't want electric. Car prices have risen exponentially, and one thing that's happened that a lot of people aren't aware of, especially with German manufacturers, is that because of the advent of electric cars and young people passing the test, automatic test rather than a manual car test, those of you that don't live in the UK, we have two different tests, one for a manual and one for an automatic. If you pass a manual test, you can drive an automatic, but if you only pass an automatic test, you can't drive a manual. And because of electric cars not having gears, what a lot of manufacturers have done is they've ceased making manual gearbox cars, and it's come to bite them on the arse this year. Now, I took my car in for its first annual checkup. It's sort of not an MOT, but it's just a free of charge checkup that BMW give to owners after the first year of ownership. And I was talking while I was there to the salesman that actually sold me the car, and he said this is the worst year for sales they've ever had. Now, part of it is the fact that there's very little spare cash going around, so people are hanging on to the cars longer, but one of the things they have found out is because they're only making automatic cars, a lot of people are reluctant to buy a new one, or they're going to other manufacturers that still make manuals, so they're losing a lot of sales because they only have automatics. And this does seem to be a common story in the UK car industry at the moment. It seems to me people are hanging on to 3 and 4 year old cars that they would normally sell on and get a new one, and they're perhaps buying a commuter bike instead, because the whole industry at the moment is just so full of uncertainty. Everybody's so strapped for cash that the sensible thing to do is just lay out a little bit on a new commuter motorcycle while they see what the way ahead is going to be a year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years down the road. We've already entered a period of austerity, although a lot of people haven't realised it yet. One that's set to go on for quite some time. And in times of austerity, of course, that's when the commuter motorcycle reigns as king or queen of the road, because it's the only thing that's available and affordable to people. And as our economy becomes more entrenched in decline, as it's undoubtedly going to be for the foreseeable future, I can see more and more people being dragged into this decision. Do I buy a new car, or do I stop using the car and get a motorcycle to get to work? It just makes sense when times are the way they are. I know I've made videos on this subject over the years, and it's just things like bus lanes and cycle lanes, making our roads narrower now. We've got a lot of areas in my locale that used to be dual carriageway, but now they're back to just a slightly wider single carriageway, because they've put bus lanes in and cycle lanes in, which has taken up half the carriageway, which means only half the amount of traffic can get through at any given time. This is causing more congestion at the sort of busy times, the congestion times during the day, people going to work and leaving work. And again, a motorcycle can skip through situations like that far easier because it's nowhere near as wide as a car. And where I live, I know it's not the same everywhere, but motorcycles can use bus lanes, so quite often you've got a clear run through the traffic. I think it's been on the cards that people are going to start seeing sense and heading in this direction for quite some time now. It's a gradual change in people's behaviour caused by government policy and a sudden and steep rise in the cost of living. Of course, it could just be an aberration in the market, and things might return back to normal next year, but I have a feeling we're going to see a downward trend in sales of larger, more expensive motorcycles, and we're going to see the commuter class continue to rise over the next 2 or 3 years. We'll see where it goes. Once again, thank you so much for taking the time to watch this and my other videos, and in doing so helping to support this channel. I really do appreciate it. If you've enjoyed this video, you can help me out by leaving a like or hitting the hype button if the hype button is available to you. It will give the video a little bit more reach on this platform, and you could also consider becoming a subscriber if you're not already a subscriber. Now, on that subject, I've had a lot of people complaining that they've been long-term subscribers and they've suddenly found that they're not subscribed anymore. Quite a few people, actually. It looks like YouTube's up to its usual tricks. Either it's broken and it's unsubscribing people, or they're unsubscribing people for a reason. I'm not quite sure what that reason could be, but please check your subscription and resubscribe if you found that you've been unsubscribed. I would appreciate it. I am of course going to be back on Friday, so until then please ride safely and I'll see you soon.